Dirt is a term that you might be using around the greenhouse today, but you're probably not using dirt or soil in your greenhouse at all. What we used early in the 1900s is mineral or field soils straight from the ground outside. We aren't using this today because it might contain weed seed, plants, other pests and diseases, and it's probably not providing the chemical and physical properties that we need to consistently produce high quality plants every time. Now we use our pre-mixed substrates, or substrates that you mix on your own, consisting primarily of peat as well as many other additives, which include perlite, coir, made from the husks of coconuts, rice hulls, as well as bark and other components that you might see in this substrate container here. We're also going to talk today about different substrate additives, which are things like lime, as well as controlled release fertilizers. In this premixed substrate, the main component is peat, and probably what you're most familiar with. This was popularized around the 1950s and has only increased in popularity since then. Peat is special because of its availability worldwide, in addition to its chemical and physical properties. It's got a high amount of pore space for water and air. It also has a relatively acidic pH, which is important for nutrient availability. Perlite is the second most common component used in substrates, which you'll also see in this substrate mix. It adds aeration to the mix itself, and it's made out of expanded volcanic rock. It's very lightweight, but it can be an expensive component to the container. More recently, people have been using coconut coir. This is made from the husks of coconuts, and in comparison to peat, is not hydrophobic, meaning that when peat gets dry, it has oils, and that resists water saturating the fibers. Coir does not have that, and it wets up readily and can distribute water really easily throughout the container. Back to this substrate mix, you'll also see in here are bits of bark as well as wood fiber. These are very popular and being used as replacements for some peat component as well as a replacement for perlite. There's been a lot of research on this component in the substrate container, along with various tree species that are used to produce it. The chemical and physical properties are also different for this substrate, including a slightly higher pH compared to peat, as well as a larger particle size, which is why it can be used in replacement for perlite. A little bit less common are rice hulls. These are more commonly found in nursery production systems and can be used to top dress containers to avoid weeds germinating within that container. Some people are also including this in the substrate component to provide aeration or replace perlite or reduce the amount of peat that they have in the container. There has been research done with rice hulls because they do provide a source of silicon for the plant, which can make it stronger as well as resist some pathogens. A few additives that you'll also find or maybe even use when mixing your own substrates, one in particular is limestone. These are two different examples. Limestone can be produced in a variety of different sizes and is very important because it buffers the pH, or actually resists the pH going downward or becoming more acidic. This is very important for the fertilizers that we're using because they're often acidic fertilizers and they push the pH down. Lime can resist this pH pushed downward and make sure that our crops stay in a healthy range for nutrient availability. You'll often find this in crops like geranium that naturally produce hydrogen ions, pushing the pH down, leading to iron and manganese toxicity. Incorporating lime into your substrate is a way to avoid this. Depending on the size of the limestone, larger particles, for example, are going to last longer within the container, but not react as quickly as limestone that is a smaller particle size. The last additive that I want to talk about are controlled release fertilizers. These are prills which contain different nutrients that can be provided to the plant when mixed into the container itself and then irrigated. This can be helpful to reduce the labor that's needed to irrigate different containers. You also don't need stock tanks to mix up different fertilizers to then apply through your irrigation system. This is commonly used in mum production, but there are a few things to keep in mind. There are a lot of different formulations available, which you should use various ones for certain crops, as well as keeping in mind your water quality. Also, these can be impacted by your environment, specifically the temperature that happens during the day. If you have a high temperature that the containers get exposed to, it may dump a large amount of nutrients or salts into the container, causing root damage to your crop. The last thing I want to talk about is container size. Depending on the substrate you're using or the crop you're growing, as well as the container size, will really impact how water moves throughout the container itself. This is important because water fills the pore space. As my predecessor Will Healy often said, roots grow in air and fish grow in water. So we need that air component in the substrate to grow healthy roots. Small containers such as like a 4-inch or even smaller like a plug tray, a 512 or 288, have a very small amount of space for that air and can be saturated very quickly. So that's why more porous substrates are more helpful when there's a lot of irrigation or things stay wet. In larger containers, the movement of water is very important. At the bottom of this container could create a water table where things stay saturated. So this is why things like bark or perlite are added to have more aeration and move water down the column. So whether you're using pre-mixed substrates or mixing your own, take into account the variety of options that are available. And if you're considering peat alternatives, or maybe you want to replace your perlite within your substrate, take a look at the research that's out there and then do a small trial so that you're not changing multiple things at once. If you need more information, reach out to your substrate provider, other technical experts, or look at our technical services webpage on ballseed.com for more information.